Okay, let's do part 3 of chapter 13. Talking about core competencies and entry mode. So we're going to talk about two different things here, technological know-how and management know-how. First, let's talk about technological know-how, right? So this is all about your SWOT analysis and understanding what competitive advantages does your organization have that you're looking at, and that'll help determine how they would like to enter a foreign market. So when the competitive advantage is based on proprietary knowledge, technological know-how, think about Uber maybe. Firms should avoid licensing, actually, and joint venture agreements, which is probably why, Uber at first thought this would be a good idea. So they don't want to risk losing control over the technology. If a technological advantage is only transitory, if the firm can establish its technology as the dominant design in industry, then licensing, might be attractive. But, really important to notice that, maybe Uber did have some knowledge about why they wanted to just go it on their own, because they did have this technological know-how. The other type of know-how we talk about is management. And here we talk about Starbucks or McDonald's, right? They are so good at managing restaurants. So here the competitive advantage is this is about service firms and also consulting companies, for example. The international trademark laws are generally pretty effective for protecting these trademarks. That, if you go to open up your own Starbucks shop, someone will come running after you for the most part. And the risk of losing control over management skills to franchises or joint ventures is pretty low, and allows for greater use of brand names, which at the end of the day is the most valuable asset. And so now that you think about kind of where your organization is, how do you select an entry mode? There's also pressures for pressures for cost reduction and entry mode, right? So if you're facing strong pressure for reducing your costs very quickly, then you're going to pursue some combination of exporting maybe and wholly owned subsidiaries, right? So being able to keep your costs really low. This is what happened with General Motors when they went into China. That they did a joint venture with SAIC Motor Corporation, otherwise known as the Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation. And so, right, they wanted to keep the GM cars, as low as possible. So here the allows the firm to achieve location and scale economies, as well as retain some degree of control over the manufacturing and distribution. And then the firms also pursued global standardization or transnational strategies when they do these wholly owned subsidiaries, right? And so GM then could create parts for not just China, but all of the world. So some pros and cons of acquisitions, because at the moment, they say over the last couple of decades, actually 40 to 80%, so almost, almost a majority of foreign direct investment now is done through mergers and acquisitions. And right, I have a lot of friends, a good friend actually, who works for an M&A firm. So organizations will hire his firm to give them advice on how they should do their mergers or acquisitions abroad. That they are quick to execute. So, well, you do a lot of preparation, but then once you do it, sign on the dotted line and then it's done. It enables firms to preempt their competitors. So, and in an acquisition, then you can just, very quickly get into the company and establish some territory. They can be less risky than the greenfield adventures, right? Because you have less capital, less investment. And then, but at the end of the day, many acquisitions, right, are not successful. And why are they not successful, right? Because they didn't hire anybody like you who has studied international business, right? The firm will often overpay for the assets of the acquired firm. They don't do enough research understanding what the true value is of the assets. There's a big clash between cultures of the acquiring and acquired firm. We see this with Daimler Chrysler, right? The Germans and the Americans didn't get along very easily right away. And again, I'm a big proponent, right, of making sure that you understand the culture of the country where you're going to do work. Also attempts to realize gains by integrating the operations of the acquired and acquiring entities run into roadblocks, take much longer than they forecast. So again, really important to have a really good M&A firm to help you to accurately forecast how long it's going to take to actually fully roll out the acquisition. And there's also inadequate pre-acquisition screening. So going back to that idea of like really understanding, what the organization's getting involved with when they go to do an acquisition. Two more bullet points. How do we reduce the risk of failure besides hiring an M&A firm, right? Through careful screening of the firm to be acquired, and by moving rapidly once the firm is acquired to implement it into integration plan. Because as we've seen in some examples from the book, that people start to leave, there's uncertainty as to what's going to happen. That, once you sign on the dotted line, you need to have wheels on the ground to start moving. That's why often the mergers and acquisitions are kind of in secret. They don't want the employees to know until the last minute, because they don't want them to get anxious or nervous, or the investors to get anxious or nervous, that they will come in and then immediately have a plan and be moving forward. Yeah, let's finish up this one about pros and cons of greenfield ventures, right? So that greenfield ventures, right, are attractive because they allow the firm to build the kind of subsidiary company that it really wants from the beginning, not by, acquiring something or doing a joint venture. The disadvantage is that they're slower to establish, right? They take a lot of time and research to set up. Risky because they have no proven track record. You're kind of, jumping off and jumping into the waters, not really knowing exactly how it's going to land. And it can be problematic if a competitor enters by acquisition, and then they quickly start building market share because they already are working with somebody who's already been in the country before. So yeah, really important to understand that. But the nice thing is that with a greenfield venture, you don't have to think about, changing a culture. You're just going to be setting up your own new culture from the home country. So what choice? This really depends, as I said, for my finance professor at Thunderbird, the answer is always, it depends, right? It depends on the circumstances confronting the firm. If there are already well-established enterprises or interests, an acquisition might be best. Greenfield might be too slow to establish a presence. If there are no incumbents, or the firm's competitive advantage is based on the transfer, as we talked about earlier in this chapter, embedded competencies, skills, routines, culture. Maybe greenfield is best. Things such as skills and organization culture are much easier to embed in a new venture, as I just mentioned, than in an acquired entity, right? And so it really depends, right, on the SWOT analysis, what you're coming to the table with, how much time you have to prepare, how much capital you have to prepare, your knowledge, the time, the state of the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of different variables, lots of long Excel spreadsheets that those consultants help with when factoring all these different variables. So that finishes up our chapter 13. Let's go ahead and do the summary. We explain the 3 basic decisions that firms contemplate when making foreign expansion: which markets to enter, when to enter those markets, and on what scale. We compared and contrasted the different modes. Again, a review from previous chapters, but deeper dive into some of those. We've identified the factors that influence a firm's choice of entry mode, right? Their SWOT analysis, their core competencies. And then we recognize the pros and cons of acquisitions versus greenfield ventures. Great. Thank you so much for joining me for chapter 13. I will see you again for chapter 14 in the next video.